done that. Let's see how that goes. Tweet. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming. It's exciting to see this many people come out and spend their Saturday doing this. So I'm going to talk about empathy first. So I'm Mike Osswald again. I work at Hanson Inc., which is an agency, digital agency in Toledo, about 65, 70 people. I'm going to tell you why putting empathy first is an advantage. So having empathy, right? It's the ability to understand what someone else might be thinking or feeling, and better understanding of people is how we lead to imagining how they might act, right, or feel, and that will lead to better experiences. It's pretty core to what we think about, right, about being user-centered design, about thinking about keeping the audience in mind, all the people that we are really doing the work for, and so that's very important, and I think it's great, aligned with the theme of today, designing for difference, as well as just the theme of the world today in general. We really have to keep focusing on doing the right things. I began with this issue at our company, and I hope that this resonates with you guys. With continued pressure to do more with less, what does it look like to put empathy first? So I wanted to make sure that all the things that we're doing are the most people-focused activities, deliverables, and communication. I want to think of, again, there's 50 things that you could be doing, and we're going to pick and choose a different kind of projects, and we're going to compare what's there. But we have to think about keeping people first, and for me, that's empathy first. 3 things that had to happen efficiently, for me to get this project in my mind working. First, I had to obviously do things that understand people's true needs. Secondly, it's really important to help everyone on our team and in our clients' world share the collective understanding and add their perspective, because I think along the full process, as our company has worked and other companies, there's points where it falls off and things turn into tactics, and the people who are meant to make something great may have lost the vision. I don't want to lose that vision, right? And I want to do work that spans the life of the project and beyond. I don't want to just make artifacts that are great for the person who reads them and then they go, okay, here's what we're going to do, and then it's gone. Same kind of idea. This is my empathy-focused framework. This is actually, the top bar is how our company works. In general, and it's typical of how we all should be working, I think. We have discovery sessions, we have discovery process, we get everything in place. Then we move to make sense of it. We move to think of the strategic import of the different ideas, how they align with the business needs. And then we start to break things down, we start to make experiences. And then at some point we start to build. We want to go in one direction. We want to get all the right information and move forward. We don't want to go backwards. It costs a lot of money to go back, especially if you build something wrong. I'm going to talk about 10 things very quickly, but I always talk quickly, so follow. Number 1 is listening sessions. I'm going to talk about those. I'm going to talk about summarizing the listening with less bias. I'm going to talk about a new form of stories, story narrative form of personas. I'm going to talk about empathy mapping, experience design scenario stories, journey maps that include empathy signals. I want to talk about design concepts with real content. I want to think about design critiques of involving your entire team with the intent to make changes. I want to talk about new forms of requirements that include the why. I want to think about QA and measurement throughout the process with a human focus. So I'm going to start with listening sessions. So in our world, it's easy to kind of, you always know what you're going for, and you grab a team of people, grab a team of people, if you have the opportunity to interview people, you chose them for a specific reason. You're going into this with the mindset. But the key here of putting empathy first is to practice more listening sessions if you're not. Being a neutral moderator, guiding people to topics, saying as little as possible. I love when 2 hours go by in a meeting and I said 3 things, but I have a list of 100 things that I was going for, and I think they touched on all those things. It's a process, and I can't teach that to you quickly, but it's important to capture as most information you can, record the sessions, have someone else take notes. The more you can get people to say in that time that you have allotted, the better, right? It's not about you speaking. If you've got an hour with someone, that you want them to talk for an hour, and you want to listen to the way they think, the principles that guide them, how they go about deciding. Again, I can't teach you that immediately, but the idea is, how do you think about listening and getting as much information? When it comes time to summarize, again, quickly, but summarizing with less bias, you have to understand, you have to ask why. I don't mean asking 5 whys of the person you are interviewing, But I'm talking about, don't go into your notes looking for conclusions, looking for the salient, sound bites that your client is paying for. Don't start there. Start by looking at the core of what the people said. Look at the notes, understand why, say to yourself, why did they say those things? Work on the root causes. Collect those root causes. You want to document the reasons why they said what they said. As important as it is to listen to them and hear them and make, of course, quotes of what people said, you're looking for the core. And again, I can't teach you that exactly quickly, but Indy Young did a lot of work, and she talks about bottom-up approaches. And I think that's what we're kind of talking here, is don't jump to conclusions. The third one is personas as stories. Obviously, there's some talk. You might have, if you read online, you see things, people are like, oh, I'm not going to call anybody users anymore, and so forth. I never think about people as users. I will call them users when we're working on something, because that's an easy way to generically refer to the intended person. But obviously people are employees, they're students, they're customers, they're potential customers, patients, plumbers, people with feelings and motivations. That's just a side note. But the idea is to develop character stories in a new form of persona, or persona thinking that is really writing a story of what the person is going through. And if you do this well, it means you've actually captured what's going on, but you're also creating a story which is really powerful for people to understand and step better into people's shoes. So again, borrowing something from Indy Young, who's been talking about it a lot, I think it's about, there's some interesting approaches. So I'm just going to illustrate really quickly. This is a story of Kaylee, a 20-year-old single mother, Henryton, Kentucky. There's a picture of her, low-income single mother, lives with her aunt. She works far from home, goes to night classes, accepted to campus daycare, wants to open a daycare someday. When you read that story right there, it's full of that kind of those points. Here's a different story. This one's called A Better Life. And this one is kind of summarized a little bit here. Growing up, I saw the struggle my mom went through finding a job, searching for cheap places to live, putting everything into her job for years only to be let go, living with grandparents. Mom was a broken person. Life got rough. The experience made me determined to change things for the next generation. I was happy to find night classes so my family can take care of each other. With a college degree, I can get a good job. I'll be able to afford a solid place. We'll have more opportunity. These two stories are based on the same research and interviews, but they're very different in how the person chose to write up the story. And if you look at the one on the left, well, the argument goes, it has a lot of things that don't really help you understand the person inside. There's age, location, photo, facts. Assumptions were made by the person who created that story. Whereas on the right, we're hearing some more things about the inner thoughts, the beliefs, the reactions, the guiding principles of that person. And actually, that's what Indy Young said. It was very controversial, I think, at the time, a few years ago. Please remove age, gender, ethnicity, location from your personas. None of these things cause behavior or thinking, but they cause assumptions. So this is a technique to put assumptions aside, create more bias-free understanding of the people you support. So that's kind of the third piece. So personas that get more to capturing what's going on in people's mind. Empathy maps. How can I go wrong? It's called empathy, right? Empathy maps. The way I think of empathy maps is really helping you focus on the small pieces and that are grounded in what people are really like. So we're starting to take the stories and we're starting to break things down, and eventually we have to figure out what to do. And this is a way to take things that you've actually heard and begin to do that. You may have seen those, X-Plane has ones, Nielsen Norman Group on the right. You're mapping out for a given persona. I would say that not necessarily for the entire life of the persona, but it might be starting to get into a piece of some of the core problems. Mapping out things, you're starting to put down thinking and feeling. And of course, you're interpreting. You might hear sometimes in politics, like, I can't say what he is thinking, right? I can't say what that person is feeling. I don't have access to their brain. But you start to, and you start to put this stuff down as evidence of truth. And what happens is it starts to help you clarify what's really, what's there in smaller pieces so that you can start to put them to use as you think of the idea. This is called empathy mapping. Lots of different forms of mapping. There's all sorts of ways to map out. What did I hear them say? What don't I know? What do I know? All those kind of things. But empathy mapping alone, if I'm picking and choosing from a list of things we could do, focusing on empathy first. That's a good one. Back to stories again. So as we go to beginning to get into what we're going to build, using the persona stories, the expression of the person's feelings and beliefs, and empathy maps, breaking it down into smaller pieces, we want to think about experience design scenarios. So this is really about writing a prominent as-it-is today story, contrasted with a story in a perfect world. And you may have seen that before. I'll give you another example here. It's got long word form, but it'll make some sense. This is from Jared Spool on Medium, and if you know Jared Spool, you know he's going to be more leaning maybe towards the constructive, you know, the raw data, maybe less on the feeling side. I don't want to pass judgment on his ideas, but I mean that's it's a good thing to do. But I'm thinking about empathy, so I'm using an empathy view of this. So this says today Terry is flying on 2 flights with a tight connection through Charlotte. He's taken the trip dozens of times before, he or she. Like usual, it takes more than an hour to get home. It's a 90-minute flight. Then the second leg is a 3-hour flight. After the entire journey, leaving home, it'll take upwards of 7 hours. The connection's short. Terry will have to hurry to make the connection. There's no time to stop for food. It'll mean Terry will have to bring food from home, prefers not to check bags, the amount of carry-on space is limited, he's worried about bringing food, etc. And this time he went without eating dinner. This is a story. I'm going to show you the contrasting experience design scenario story, a story of how it could be. Terry is checking in for tomorrow's flight. During the process, the app points out the short connection, offers Terry the option to pre-order lunch from one of Charlotte's fine restaurants. Terry selects a salad and some sides. From the restaurant, the app confirms the choice, charges the card, the meal is ready at the gate. It loves the convenience of having ready to eat lunch during the second leg of the trip. That's a story about how it could be, right? And there's kind of it's sort of another vote for maybe ditching traditional personas. Now, the Jared Spool may have been arguing, in the grand scheme of things, actually the article is called When It Comes to Personas, the Real Values and the Scenarios. There's no one's arguing we don't need personas, which I think we do. But the point that's made in that article is really that we don't know very much about Terry. We don't know if it's a business trip or visiting family. We don't know how many times or why they've made the journey. We don't know nationality, race, age, gender identity. We don't really know anything about the things we normally would put into persona, but we were able to tell a good story about a solution that we would create that we could think would be beneficial. So there's a couple things going on there, but I think the idea is really that telling a story form of a solution before you get to making comps or any kind of things is going to be really important. When you do journey maps, do journey maps that have thinking and feeling in them. And here's an example of a beautiful journey map. There's dozens of them, right? We all kind of done them in one form or another. Here's one. It's of the Smithsonian South Mall. It shows the steps of people moving across, and going and arriving at the building, experiencing a building, leaving a building, and so forth. And it's beautiful. In our world, though, this is nice, but it doesn't show why. It doesn't illustrate why. And so here's one I just found on the internet. I'm not quite sure where, unfortunately. But it includes thinking and feeling in today's experience. It includes opportunities. Even the actual doing part is just like, icons, right? There's not even doesn't have specific computer interface kind of things or anything like that. What's important about simply making a journey map that includes, thinking and feeling, and it's a current situation map, is that it shows what it'll take to get the people to their next step. It actually shows you what the motivations the person needs to keep going. It actually shows the questions that stop them from going. It actually shows the big barriers and blockers that you need to solve. So the fact of the matter is a journey map is really nice, but that doesn't make it happen. What makes it happen is that every step along the way you've created an experience that involves the person's needs and you've solved them for them so that they can go forward, right? And that's the whole point of that. I mean, they're made for you and your team. If you're making a journey map to just show how things will be done, right, to someone else, and you've got limited resources and you're trying to do better with your time and you want to be more user-focused, make it for you. Make it for you and let it show you the way forward and the actual things you need to do in order to succeed with that person. Design concepts with real content. I come from a background where we did used to create a lot more, wireframes. We'd create a lot more documentation around wireframes. We'd move on into, some simple comps and other kind of things. We'd move forward. The goal here, though, is again trying to move more quickly, is to really design with real content in mind. Don't use lorem ipsum if you can avoid it, right? And the other concept is really, the real big issue is just content first, right? And any way you can get there. Jeffrey Zeldman, who you may know is, a huge, prominent designer for years, said over 10 years ago, content precedes design. Design in the absence of content is not design, it's decoration. If you're a designer and you came from a traditional role, you really love to start designing things. And if you're a UI person, you came from the traditional role, you really like to draw out wireframes. And somewhere in between, we're trying to cut things, shorten things, get to quicker opinions. There's a couple more things, though. The words that we choose affect the change, they change the choices that people make. So as we're trying to make them, we have to recognize, and this is from Lexi Martin on his Northern site, just demonstrating choice architecture, which is really, again, it's the approaches that we use to help people decide. You have visual design, you have interaction design, you have interface elements, certainly, but you also have language. It's a big piece of it. We shouldn't forget that, that we want to do that. At Hanson, we sometimes, depending on the project, we have an opportunity to create some visual concepts. These are concepts, they're not the final piece. And they're actually reflecting, in this case for Cooper Tire, they're reflecting different approaches to something. The first one is a quality approach. It's demonstrating how awesome this tire is in different ways. The second one is a user experience approach, or different personas. What drives you? There's something there about, I need it now, or I'm an off-roaded person, or I'm an auto enthusiast. Those different people would have different points in this idea. And the third idea is more an empathetic approach, or centered on the benefit. Why do tires matter? Your car should stop when you need it to, right? And there's a sort of an illustration there. These are thoughtfully action-packed with tactics that come from the strategy. Each one picked and chose a little bit different things to illustrate and include. And in fact, in the end, the final site that we built doesn't look necessarily like the first comps. But those concepts early on were important because they had real copy. We could get more deeper conversations with people. We could test with them. They were actually doing some brand work at the same time to figure out how they might reposition themselves. So some of our user experience design work was actually helping elevate information for the overall brand approach. But in any case, content first, even design first if you can. Something that our company needs to continue to work on is really getting more people involved in the process, and getting, being able to step back and look closer at, do things that we're coming up with meet needs of the audiences that we're defining. So the idea is really about design critiques or feedback workshops, hosting them earlier in the process if you don't include those. Include everyone who's on the team, people who have all the different roles and disciplines, people who understand the different persona audiences, right? You're critiquing, I would say you should critique a complete scenario. You're not just looking at pages, do you like that page? You're avoiding problem solving during this process. You're not going away going, what should we actually fix? You're really just talking about ways in which you like it, or it doesn't like, or it doesn't illustrate, or it doesn't seem to work for that particular audience. You're building a shared understanding with your team from people who may never have ever seen or gotten to step into the shoes of the audience that they're eventually building work for. So it's always about improvement. Seeing is believing. Seeing is inspiring. It also lets you judge what's not working. And so back to those comps early in the earlier step about content first and design first. There's something really powerful if you have the opportunity to go to a design that you feel is good, because people can see it and really step into it. They can also see what's wrong. You can go, oh, I love that, but it didn't do that for me. And so if you're kind of combining these two ideas together, if you go into it knowing that you want someone to look at it and come away with an impression, and it's not the finished thing, I'm not walking out the door and showing it to the client 5 minutes from now, you have an opportunity to look at something very visual. So people are very visual thinkers, and I think that helps a lot. So number 9, documenting more meaningful requirements. And I think another area where we have tended in the past to filter out the human element is as we start to move into descriptions of things that affect scope, and we start to create, all the statements that are about what something should do. But I wanted to think about, as we capture and define the what, we need some sort of just enough form of communication, documentation to keep that why front and center. We need it to be made available all throughout the process, because at some point, we may start doing exactly that thing, but up until that point, we want everyone's ability to contribute to be available. It's only right, that we have, 20-something people maybe working on a project. You may have 10 or 5, but if only one of those is setting the stage for the whole experience and the others are just waiting for instructions, you're not doing the right thing. I broke down different audience needs, different approaches, requirements, just general things, or the use case form. I looked at agile user value statements. I'll go over towards Scott. A persona can do something, an actor can do an action with the system. Agile as a role, I want to action, so the expected outcome. But what really intrigues me is job to be done, job stories, and the whole entire jobs to be done process. I think it's fascinating. I think it has some rigor to it. I think there's a way to approach it. There's opponents and proponents of everything on all sides. But what is nice in my sense is that when situation, I want to motivation so that expected outcome of value. In other words, I'll give you some very simplified examples. And behind the scenes of these little simple statements, obviously, are lists of details about how this thing might be done. So a customer can withdraw cash from the bank, and that's easy to write down. I might write down 120 different things on a given project about just things that should be done. An agile statement might say, as a customer, I want to search for a transaction so I can see if it's cleared. And then, again, behind the scenes, you might say what they can put into the input box in searching for a transaction. You might put all these like other kinds of facts. Someone who's composing this type of a statement gets to filter out what the audience is supposed to do. A jobs to be done form might work like this. When I don't have any cash, I want to withdraw it without going into the bank so that I can get on my day without any fuss. It captures the same sort of stuff that whoever's working on the project is doing the requirements gets to capture requirements. But it starts to add some definition to it. It defines the motivations. It does not define the implementation. So it means that one person who's working on that isn't solely responsible for specifically illustrating how something needs to be done. It leaves that open to further interpretation and, in fact, further scoping. Because when we work on a big project, we have many ways to do something. The project could, if the project's $500,000, you've got a lot of areas where you have to start to think about what you're going to build and what you're not going to build. The more information you have for the rest of the team to understand why something matters, they can shout out all sorts of reasons. Some of them are very technical, some of them may be user experience, some of them may be design, some may be messaging, but they get to impart their own specific skills to the solution when they have more information. I think that's really important. And finally, ensuring QA includes human focus. I call it QA. It sounds like it's at the end of the process. And I think that's where maybe it's really critical, because if we haven't done it by then, that's what we're looking for. But I think the idea is just this. Jakob Nielsen said almost 20 years ago, kind of invented the idea of discount usability testing. That idea that we only need to test with 5 people and we'll uncover 80% of the problems and so forth. It's kind of maybe the norm for most of us. But even things, I guess I would call them thrift store testing, right? So let's go even lower. Card sorts, click tests, online surveys. With empathy in mind, the best research we can do is any kind of qualitative research. It's going to be any kind of web metrics or other sort of quantitative studies, because it's at the core, it's going to be about how people think and how they feel, and it's going to be letting them give you input. So I think it may not be crazy for everybody in this room to think, oh my God, you don't get to test. But no, we don't. I mean, we still have to fight to include testing and getting research and feedback in our process. Because again, along the way, big project, you gotta pick and choose from somewhere. We always have 2 kinds of tracks going on. We try to have planning tracks, which is really about designing and testing new features, as well as the sort of focused build tracks along the way. And helping our internal people understand there's 2 kind of things going on is really important, because it's the same team often and they're getting together in the same kind of meetings, but sometimes in a meeting you're thinking about the next experience and what it could be like, and then sometimes in the meeting it's the same people there and it's the same project and it looks the same, but you're really just talking about, is this particular piece of work finished, or are there any hang-ups, or what kind of input do you need from some of the other people. But I think it was a big thing, because when we used to think of everything as kind of one, people would get confused along the way. Am I supposed to make changes here, or am I not supposed to make any changes here, and so forth. But we are not agile by any means. As a digital agency, we can't be. We have to work for the money. We have to build projects. We have to scope them up. They have to end. They have to have timelines. And the best we can do is sort of an iterative approach and recognize that sometimes we're doing things that we should be testing, and sometimes we're doing things that let's get them through. And we should be talking more about the planning things and celebrating those kind of things, and looking at the excitement of the testing, and not putting all of our budget in the build tracks and checking the builds and making sure input forms work properly and so forth. You're still going to do that, but don't forget. So the push to do more with less will continue. Our purpose hasn't really changed, ever. And it's really helping people have successful interactions. This is how our work should be judged, you know? And it's really hard to do that. And I think it's, you know, even I've been doing this 20 years and it's still hard for us to know that we're successful if we don't include time to be challenged, include time to make sure that the projects are successful. You know, also your perspective, your history, your knowledge, your skill, accompanied by this business pressure to do more with less, is going to make you cut corners. It's going to make you look for the obvious. It's going to make you maybe ask someone, so would you like this to happen? And they say, oh yeah, they said that, you know. You have to work on that, right? Empathy as a whole, it takes a lot of practice. Some people might argue it's a something you're born with. It is actually a learned skill, in my opinion. It is something that you can focus on. And so what I'm talking about today are shortcuts that kind of help you be empathetic, because they're actions and activities and documentation and processes that are empathetic in approach, right? And so that's the specific activities to diminish bias, aid in understanding. So that's why I say putting empathy first is an advantage. And I see that we're running low on time. If you want to talk, I'd love to talk. We can lunch or in the hall or wherever. Follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Medium, and so forth. So thanks.
All right, we're going to take a break until about 11:30. If you haven't checked out the Accessibility Empathy Lab yet, I'd go check